So I see that it's 11:15, and I guess I should start. Let me see here. My view, if I can see everyone. Okay. It says we have 10 participants, but I don't know if we do for sure or not. I'm not seeing them listed. Maybe here. Yeah, great. Okay. This is for administrators at school sites, principals, assistant principals, and just giving you an overview of SEIS and the important parts that will benefit you from looking at SEIS. I know it can be a very confusing program to look at, but it will give you critical information about the IEPs and the state of the IEPs at your specific school site. With me today is Rodora Ayuyang, who is one of our data folks. She is the person who does a lot with me. She does everything to help out with SEIS and works directly with it every day. Rodora, can you introduce yourself?
Oh, hello. Thank you, Brian, for that intro. Welcome, everyone, to our admin SEIS training. Yes, I do assist Brian, although he is the brain of this operation. But yes, I do assist him in processing requests and responding to SEIS inquiries. So hopefully this presentation will be a good introduction or even a refresher, or just be informative for everyone who's participating. Thank you.
Thanks, Rodora. So I am the person who oversees SEIS and also the person who does all of the CalPADS reporting. These two programs actually interact a lot, and that's why it's so critical that our reporting to the state is done through SEIS to CalPADS. So this is the bit.ly welcome where you sign into this. So please sign in. I'll leave that up for a moment to make sure that you're signed in. I also would urge you to feel free to ask questions during this session. It's I want it to be as interactive as possible for you, and your questions will be helpful. This is for SEIS, for SEIS administrators, not special ed administrators, and not SEIS administrators, site administrators, I'm sorry. If you feel like you're here in error, then feel free to leave. If you're not a site administrator, it's fine for you to stay. So don't feel like you have to leave if you are not. Our norms today are the district norms of, participation and muting yourself when you're not talking and all of those nice things, with keeping liberation for the oppressed at the center and be solution-oriented and anti-racist, and be present and comfortable in discomfort. The access and equity and student achievement are really critical. And with special ed students, access and equity is oftentimes hard to achieve. But SEIS is part of that mechanism that hopefully helps to do that through the writing of the IEP. Student achievement also should be being addressed through the writing of the IEP, and our accountability to our students and our families and everyone really is through that IEP document for the students. Equity, again, is our definition and our frame, eliminating oppression and ending biases and all of those things.
Hi, Brian.
Yes.
Hi. Do you have the button to enable live transcription?
I do.
Could you do that? Well, the DOT admin just suggests that we should turn it on.
Okay, there you go.
All right, thank you.
It's on.
Brian, did you want to share the presentation on the screen?
Oh, yes. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I didn't share my screen.
There you go.
What to do.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Okay, so by the end of this session, hopefully you'll have a better understanding of the importance of the IEP timelines and the accuracy of the IEP document. We're going to talk a little bit also about progress reports because they're a direct part of the IEP process and they're done through SEIS. The importance of affirming an IEP, and I know people talk about that all the time. We're going to define what affirming is and why it's critical, and the roster accuracy and case manager caseload accuracy. It's important because only the case manager can affirm an IEP for a student, but roster accuracy is important because what is in synergy and what is in SEIS need to match, or they're not going to have access to the students. The case managers will not have access to the students correctly. And that creates CalPADS errors. CalPADS is sent to the state by two mechanisms. One is through SEIS, and one is directly through the district and the county offices of ed to CalPADS. Those two, when CalPADS gets them, they have to match. So any student that's not in the correct school site or grade level or whatever, that if there's any differences between SEIS and CalPADS when they do that match, it creates errors that we have to fix that are not always easy to fix, unfortunately. Okay, so today's agenda is how to sign in. I hope that you were able to sign in. Should I go back to that since I wasn't sharing screen? We will do that. So it's this bit.ly link that you would sign into this one for. And then let me go here. So hopefully you'll have a better understanding of the dashboard. We'll talk about future versus current IEP, amendments and transactional reporting, progress reporting, and where you can find training materials and resources, and SEIS support and the help desk. This is a links. If you click on that, you go to a number of different links in that are helpful. I don't want to click on it just because it's lengthy. Okay, if you have a SEIS account, then you probably have logged in already and know this page. So if you don't have a SEIS account, please email us at seishelp@sfusd.edu, this link right here, and we can definitely create that account for you. We just need to know what school you're at. All administrators at all schools should have a school site account, and that will give you access to all of the students with IEPs at your school site. You'll be able to see all of those IEPs. And that's important so that you can access your dashboard, because your dashboard is going to reflect the students at your school site. Okay, any questions with that? Okay. Okay. When you log in to SEIS, you will be taken from that login page to the SEIS dashboard, and it's going to look very similar to this. Actually, it's going to look like this, only it's going to reflect numbers for your school students only, the students that are assigned to your school site. So you'll be able to see the requests that your teachers have sent for us to do things in SEIS, maybe change a student's eligibility, or add a student to someone else's account, or to exit a student, or to really just do about anything in that record that needs to be done that they can't do. This section here on follow-up is the part that is going to be most helpful to you, because this will tell you there will be numbers there. And if you click on the number there, you will be able to go directly to the students that do not have affirmed IEPs. And you'll be able to ask those specific case managers why that's not affirmed. The same with amendments. You'll be able to click there and it'll take you to the list of students who have amendments that have not been affirmed. Unsigned IEPs. IEPs need to be signed by parents. They don't always sign them, but we are under the obligation to get that signature. It can be obtained at any point after the IEP meeting has been held. The sooner the better. And unsigned amendments. And then this is a part that says electronic signatures, and that just tells you if that IEP or amendment is out for electronic signature. And if you click on any of these with the numbers, you're going to see who those students are and who the case managers are. CalPADS alerts will give you information about program setting and anyone that's in preschool program settings. You don't have to worry about this too much. With CalPADS alerts, the case manager is going to get an automatic alert and be directed to send us a request through SEIS, and then we will respond to that. Meeting alerts, this is in a nutshell, are the next annual IEP. This will give you whose IEPs are coming up within the next 30 days. If you click on this one, it's going to tell you who's past due. But if you click on just this one, it's going to give you those past dues first in the order that the IEPs are due. It's also going to give you a 90-day window of when triennial IEPs are due. And that's for planning purposes. Teachers should not rely on this when they're planning their IEP meetings. This is a meeting alert only. Initial evaluations. When we have an initial evaluation, the assessment plan goes out. When we get it back from the parent signed, we have 90 days and 60 days, I'm sorry, to complete that assessment. So we have 60 days to complete the assessment, write the reports, and hold the IEP. The important thing to remember there is these are calendar days. They are not work days. So we do get a break on that if we have a time that school is closed for more than 5 days. So the only time during the school year that we get a break on initial evaluations and that 60-day timeline is when we have winter break or Christmas break. That's longer than 5 days. Thanksgiving is a 5-day break, so it doesn't count. So we have a 60-day window to complete the assessments and hold the IEP, write the reports, hold the IEP meeting, or we're overdue and out of compliance. Interim placements and 30-day reviews. When a student comes from another district into San Francisco, if they come from out of state, if they come from another country, we have a 30-day window to hold an IEP so that we can adjust the services. You also have a user analytics here, and you can see actually who of your staff has signed in over the week, and see what that is. Students who are have an IEP and are eligible will have a blue dot next to their name. So you'll always know when you look at that list of students on your student list that anybody with a blue dot is a student who is currently eligible for services. If they have a green dot, that means they're pending. They have not had their initial IEP yet, and they're still in that assessment process, or they have held an initial IEP, but the parent hasn't signed. If there's an initial IEP and the student is determined to be eligible for services, then we need to change that student from pending to eligible, but we cannot do that without parent signature. And that parent signature must be uploaded to SEIS before we can make that change. So sometimes we're waiting for the parent signature. Sometimes staff have it, but they don't upload it. So we really need it to be uploaded. That's critical. Questions? No questions? Okay. So unaffirmed IEPs. A student will pull into this notice if the IEP on the future is after the IEP date on the current IEP. So anytime we have a student whose IEP is overdue, it's going to pull in as an unaffirmed IEP. So we need to make sure that IEPs are current. Now, an IEP year, an annual year, is 1 year. That's 1 year. So if we have an IEP today on August 10th, 2023, that IEP is current until August 9th, 2023. This is 2022, right? So August 10th, 2022, the IEP is current through August 9th, 2023. As of August 10th, 2023, that IEP is out of compliance and overdue. There is no grace period. So IEPs need to be scheduled and held on or before the due date to keep them current. Unaffirmed IEPs, if an IEP has been held for a student, it needs to be affirmed, and all IEPs and amendments need to be affirmed within 7 days of when the meeting is held. That's an obligation of the case manager. For students who are currently eligible for services and they're having an annual IEP or a triennial or an amendment to their annual IEP, parent signature is not required to affirm that IEP. We can't implement the services in that IEP, but we can affirm it. Affirming the IEP, and I'll get more into this, is what triggers to the state that we have done our part and that IEP has been held. We still need to get parent signature, and then we can mark it as signed later on when we do get parent signature. And I say that because we have an obligation under the law to get signatures on all IEPs. And part of the affirming process asks that question: has this IEP been signed? If it has not, the case manager should select no. If it has, then it's yes. If it has not been signed at the time that the IEP is affirmed and a signature comes later than that, it's really simple for them to go in and change that from not signed to yes, that it's signed. And the content specialist or the cohort supervisor can easily show them how to do that. When I do my SEIS training with the staff, I do show them that, and I will continue to show that. Any questions? I covered this a little bit earlier, but this next IEP date for the annual and triennial, when you click on this and you get these numbers, hopefully these IEPs, especially for the annuals, have already been scheduled. One of the first things that your case manager should do is schedule all of their IEPs and triennials for the year now when school starts. If they do that and send that calendar, you're going to be able to be more available because you're a required member of an IEP team to be there. The other related service providers for that student are going to be able to manage their schedule better. If staff depend on this 30-day window, they're not going to have you may not have the availability. The service providers may not have the availability. The parents may not have the availability, because to hold an IEP, you have to have a legal IEP team. And that consists of the parent or the ed rights holder, if the parent does not hold the student's educational rights. You as the administrator have to be there. And the gen ed teacher has to be there for all IEPs. That's the law. And the special ed teacher has to be there, along with any other related service providers. So anyone who provides services for that student needs to be in attendance at that IEP. If one of them cannot be there, related service providers can provide written information prior to the IEP meeting and be excused. That requires an excusal form to be signed by the parent before the meeting begins. But the parent, the ed rights holder, the administrator for the district, the gen ed teacher, and the special ed teacher are not ever supposed to be excused. On rare occasions, a gen ed teacher can be excused if they provide written information prior to the meeting. And again, that requires the parent's excusal. Any questions about that? So next triennial gives 90 days. Initials, like I said, are a 60-day window, and that's a really tight time frame. For initial IEPs, the person that's going to be leading those meetings and leading that process will either be your school psychologist. They're the ones who send out the assessment plans, typically. For some students, it's going to be your speech pathologist, because they are also able to lead that process. Students can be eligible for services as speech only. So in that case, if that's the area, the only area that the student has needs, the school psychologist may not be involved. Interim placements are that 30-day window from the time the student starts. We need to implement an IEP, but we may need to adjust the time of the services on that IEP when they come from another district or another state or another country. Usually we do. Questions about any of that? Quiet group. This just says the same thing that I had said earlier. If any of you work with early ed folks, students turning 3 is something that we have to deal with separately. And infants are separate, and those are IFSPs and not IEPs for those students, the type of plan. To access the students, if you want to just open your SEIS and look at the students who are listed in your school, you just click on students on the black toolbar at the top of your dashboard or your login page, that home page, and you'll get a drop-down menu that looks like this. So you'll see the students. You can look at them through any of these student IEPs. You can look at them by caseload. You can look at who's eligible, who's pending, who's been exited, and where their plan type or transferred students. The easiest way for you and the quickest way, I like to use just student IEPs, because it's going to list every kid at your school alphabetically it will tell you their name and who their case manager is, and you'll be able to access their current IEP, any past IEPs. You'll be able to see if anything's being done in the future IEP in preparation. So I like that the best because you want to work with current material. And I think that's going to be the most efficient way for you to look at it. So students' IEPs show that eligible and pending. That's that blue or green dot. Blue is eligible, green is pending. It's going to be right next to their information to the left of that drop down of the list of students, and the caseload appears. You'll be able to look at all providers for a student if you search it by caseload, but then you're searching by that person's caseload and you put in that person's name.
Brian, we have a question.
Okay.
If you hold an interim IEP, does that date become the new annual?
It does not. Good question. The interim IEP is just that. It's an interim IEP just to hold over from whatever the annual date was, because you're getting this kid at some point within the year. Now, if the annual date is close, let's say that the annual IEP date is a month away, so you're holding an interim IEP, but next month or in 3 weeks, you're going to have to hold an annual. Then you actually could hold an annual, but it needs to be, I would say, no more than 2 months out. So if it's coming within the 2-month period in the future of when you get that student and you feel comfortable that you can call it an annual review, you can do that instead. And then that could change that IEP date. But to do that, you have to have permission from the parent. The parent has to agree to changing the IEP date. So you want to make that very clear with them. Some parents are fine with that. Some parents don't want that, and they want you to hold 2 meetings. And if they say that, then that's what you have to do. Any other questions?
Can it be done as an amendment?
It is done as an amendment, actually. It's done through the current IEP as an amendment. It's just called an interim IEP. That's the purpose of the amendment, yes. So anytime you have an annual IEP, any meeting held within that annual year is done through an amendment. And then the purpose of that meeting is what you call it. And interim IEP or 30-day review is fine to call it that. And that takes care of it. Any other questions? Okay, feel free to speak up too if you want. There are different levels of users in SEIS. So school site level is the kind of SEIS account that you should have as an administrator. You'll be able to have access to only students at your school site that are assigned to your school site. If you have more than one school site, because sometimes people do, that one account can take you to all of those. You can have one account that will show you multiple school sites. If you'd prefer to have individual accounts for those multiple sites that you manage, we can do that as well. So you'll be able to view, like I said, exited, transferred students. You'll be able to view students with plan type 300, 700, 800, 900. Those are students who are not active anymore in SEIS, but you'll be able to see what was going on with those students when they were active in SEIS. And oftentimes those are students who were assessed and did not qualify, or they were assessed and did qualify, and the parent said that they did not want the services. Okay. Right, service. The teacher level account If you want to be listed, and sometimes site administrators have a special ed background and they help out a lot at the school site with the actual documentation. If you want to be listed as a provider so that, and you are providing some level of service, that happens, you would need a teacher account to be listed to do that, and we can provide that for you. That's not a problem. I talked a little bit about comparing the Synergy roster and the SEIS roster. That is really an important feature. I also want you to note that any student who is at a district school site, that they should be under San Francisco Unified School District. If it's a student who is at a county program, then they should be under the County Office of Ed in SEIS. If they are not, then we need to make that change. And that does happen because students travel sometimes. They get assigned to programs that could either be district programs or county programs. Being that we are a one district SELPA in San Francisco, we don't differentiate between the district and the county in terms of our staffing. There's fluidity there. So oftentimes students will move from a district program to a county program or county program to a district program. And that causes CalPEDS errors, and that information doesn't get reported. But it's also critical because if you're at a district school or at a county program, you're not going to be able to schedule that student if their LEA is incorrect in SEIS, because you're not going to have that information that they have an IEP. It's not going to give you that information. So we need to make that change. Any questions about that? Okay, I just quickly want to go over this order of operations. So there is a part on the information and eligibility page, you probably have seen this, that's called the purpose of meeting. And under that, it says initial, annual, and triennial. So any meeting that is done in the future needs to be either an initial, an annual, or a triennial, or it can be a triennial and an annual. But if it's an initial, it's only an initial. An annual is only allowed to be done under the law once a year. Any changes that need to be made to that annual need to be made through an amendment. We can't have more than one annual within a year. We also can't have a triennial more than 3 years. But sometimes we move those up, but we need to tell why. If it's an initial, it is only an initial, and a student only has one initial. They can't have more than one initial IEP because that's when they're determined to be eligible. Any of these other things down here that are transition, pre-expulsion, or interim, or other are meetings that would be done through an amendment typically, but they might also be being done at the time of an annual. So if you have a student who is transitioning and their annual is due, both of those can be checked. And for high school students, it should be, because transition plans are always done at all annual IEPs. If there's a pre-expulsion meeting and it happens to fall at the time of the annual, both can be checked. But for anything that's being done in the future documents on SEIS, it has to be either initial, annual, or triennial, and those other 4 at the bottom can be added to that, but they cannot be standalone. So if you have a transition meeting, a pre-expulsion meeting, an interim, or an other, that can't be the purpose of a meeting if it's done in the future. It has to be, those meetings have to be done through an amendment to the annual IEP. So the case manager would go into the current IEP, they would create an amendment through the current IEP, and they would have access to all those forms through that amendment. Okay, that's just information for you to be aware of. So, and this is adding from the current amendment, you can add from the current IEP, I'm sorry, you can add an amendment, and it really should always be from the current IEP. And then in the amendment, folks are going to be given the purpose of the meeting. So they're going to put the amendment date. They're going to say that it was either a correction to some errors that were made in the IEP when it was written, and that happens. There are often clerical errors. It could be a continuation. An annual IEP or a triennial or even an initial IEP may not have been completed in one meeting, and there may be multiple meetings or 2 meetings or more than that sometimes. So if it's a continuation of that first meeting, then this amendment would be that continuation meeting purpose. An amendment is when any part of the IEP is changed, any part of that document, especially any goals, any services that requires an amendment to be held. Or corrections, if they are clerical errors, a meeting does not have to be held. That IEP can be, those corrections can be made through the amendment, and we still need to get signatures. But if it's a clerical error correction, then it's okay to not hold the actual meeting and just do it through an amendment. The case managers know that. If it's an other, that's where you could put the 30-day placement or interim IEP, or just that it was a parent request, because parents will request that you have an IEP amendment for whatever purpose. You may not change anything within the body of the IEP when it's a parent request sometimes, but if they request a meeting, we have to respond to that within 15 days of that request, and we need to hold that meeting, and it would be done through an amendment during the school year, or during that IEP cycle, I should say. Any questions? Okay. So I referred to affirming an IEP, and affirming an IEP is critical because that's considered in CalPADS a transaction. So when an IEP is held, within 7 days after that IEP, staff, the case manager actually needs to do what is called affirming the IEP. That creates a transaction. That transaction goes to CalPADS. So they need to double check these details. And I'm just sharing this with you so that you know that, and maybe can help to reinforce that. The meeting date is critical. If the meeting date is not updated on that future IEP form, it's not going to reflect that that meeting was held in a timely way. The meeting type. So it should always be, was it an annual? Was it an initial? Was it a triennial? Was it an initial and an annual and triennial? Just making sure that those boxes are checked. Did the parent sign? The signature is really parent signature. And did they sign or did they not? The projected next annual date. So like I said, if we have an annual today, August 10th, 2022, that next projected annual date would be August 9th, 2023. So that needs to be put in, and it needs to be accurate. The last triennial date is whenever their last triennial was held. So it could have been a year ago, it could have been 2 years ago. If this meeting is an annual and triennial, then the last triennial date should be the date of this meeting. And that's a little confusing. Hopefully the school psychologist or speech pathologist and the the case managers understand this, and I'll go over this with them in more detail. They usually do. That last date, if the meeting that you're holding today is a triennial IEP meeting, then the last triennial date entered into SEIS needs to be today's, and the projected triennial date needs to be 3 years from today. So if this is August 10th, 2023, that next projected triennial date would be August 9th, 2025. Okay. All right. So present levels, goals, and services. These are the 3 critical parts of the IEP that you as a school site administrator should be very, very aware of. This is what you want to look at. The other stuff gets cumbersome and confusing, but if you really pay attention to the present levels, goals, and services offer FAPE, that's what you want to make sure is happening. Present levels should be what the student can do right now. It shouldn't reflect things from years ago. It shouldn't reflect things of where they should go or where you want to get them to. It should be what are their skills that they can do right now, because from those present levels, the goals need to be developed. And the goals, the baseline of the goals that are developed should be the current present levels. So then you take those goals that you've developed on the goals page and you talk about those, and you talk about what services are needed for this student to achieve these goals within the next year. All goals under the law are supposed to be written for a 1-year period of time. Reasonably calculated is the way the law reads. So we have to think about them and reasonably calculate those goals, and can that student achieve that, and what supports and services do they need to achieve that goal or those goals within the next year. So the services, the present levels determine the goals determine the services. And that's what you're signing off on in agreement. Any questions there? Okay, I just put this in for reportable amendments because basically everything gets reported. So I put this list only because I want everybody to know that anytime we have an amendment, it is critical that that amendment be affirmed and go to CalPADS so that we get credit for those changes and that the changes are legally reflected and the state is aware of them. So transactional reporting is when a transaction is created in SEIS, and that's done by affirming the IEP. It's done for annuals, triennials, initials. It's done when a student is exited. So if they no longer qualify for services, they would be exited, or if they graduate. So we have to have a transaction in SEIS that's either an annual IEP or an amendment that exits that student from SEIS. It should always be done based on assessment unless they're graduating from high school or if the parent revoked services. Students, when a student's status changes to does not qualify, and that's when they're assessed. If their plan type changes to 300, and help me here, Adora, I'm blanking on what 300 plan type is.
It's pending.
Okay, if that student goes back to pending for some reason, and that would mean that they had qualified previously and they're no longer qualified. Sometimes a student no longer qualifies for specific learning disability, or they may not qualify anymore for speech and language, but you may be considering either one of those as another area of need that should be assessed. So we need to make that plan type change, because during that time of assessment, that student really doesn't qualify anymore. And when specific fields of an amendment are updated. So I'm going to just say that when any amendment is held here, it needs to be affirmed. But when an amendment is held that changes any of the goals or any of the services, that's when it really is critical. So I think it's better for staff to just affirm all amendments as soon as possible. The data accuracy is important because SEIS data points are reported and monitored by California Department of Ed, and that goes to the federal government for our reporting. And SEIS data points inform program and service planning for all of our students. So it's based on that data in SEIS and the amount of minutes per student per school site when we get into the allocations at the end of the year in planning for the next year. So having all of that information accurate in SEIS and affirmed in SEIS, because if that IEP isn't affirmed, if that amendment isn't affirmed, then SEIS doesn't reflect those services. It only reflects those services when it's affirmed. So affirming is critical for that reason. Any questions about that? Okay, so when you get, I'll do two things here. When you click on that students, you're going to see all of the students alphabetically they'll go down for the whole list of students who are at your school. And you're going to see this same kind of thing for all those students. So you see, this is if there are any errors, that's really for case managers to worry about. This little person is also something for case managers to worry about. This is telling you that this is a student who's currently eligible. She has a blue dot. Her name, her birth date, the name of her case manager, school district for all of you, unless you work in a county program, should be San Francisco Unified School District for all students at your school site. If you work in a county program, it should be County Office of Ed for all students at your school site. And then the name of your school. This is future IEPs, this is current IEPs, and this is historic IEPs, anything that's been affirmed in the past. This is progress reporting. And progress reporting is done through SEIS. The service providers are required to send out progress reports as often as their non-disabled peers get progress reports. That's interpreted as every time report cards go out. So on that same schedule, the case manager and the related service providers who provide services to those students need to be writing progress reports. They need to affirm those progress reports. And that gives the data that the progress reports at your school site have been completed when the progress reports are written and affirmed. And there's that window of time around progress reporting that should match your report card times. DRDP is for anyone who works with the early ed kids. That only goes from birth to 3 for DRDPs. That's a window. Okay. Any questions so far? All right. You do have on your black toolbar at the top of your home page, you have a list. Part of that says training materials. And if you click on training materials, you're going to get a drop-down menu like this. training materials, if you click on this one in the drop-down menu, it's going to give you another list that is really helpful. And I always recommend that folks look at that. SEIS automatically updates that, and it gives you a lot of information. You can look at the training videos. You can look at one that's called teacher materials. Those teacher materials will guide you through every part of SEIS. I think that for you, using your dashboard is really the best option for you, and being aware of those unsigned IEPs, the unaffirmed IEPs and amendments. If you keep on track of that, that's going to really help you. If you look at that section where the IEPs, it gives the timeline of the IEPs, those 30 days and the 90 days and the 60 days for initials. You're going to be able to click on that and see who's current, who's not current, whose IEPs are overdue. It will list the student's name and their case manager. You can speak directly to them through this, and it's your school site. You can also contact your cohort content specialist when you have needs. Hopefully we'll have them for you this year. You can contact your cohort SPED supervisor. You know that those are usually pretty close relationships, and the supervisors work very directly with schools, and content specialists should too. But use these materials. If you need us, you can always contact us. My contact is right there. It's borsosb@sfusd.edu. Rodora is the person who manages the SEIS help. And if you email there, we will respond to you. It might take a little time because there's only the two of us. Lawrence is a great administrative analyst who also will respond to you. Elton is at that time at the end of the year when allocations are being determined. Elton is very active in all of that. He's that person who handles a lot of that information. And Julia Martin is our ombuds person. And Julia works very closely with us to make sure that when anything happens, whether it's a parent situation or a school situation, she helps us too, and she's very, very responsive. Are there any questions at all from anyone? Please feel free to speak up. You see that we're 7 minutes early.
There is a question, Brian. It's about the orange circle with the white plus sign at the bottom of the student info.
Okay.
The right-hand side.
Let me go back here and see.
I think she's asking what that icon means in SEIS.
This one?
It's like, with a white plus sign.
With a white plus?
It's like a orange. Does that, I think it has something to do with health or something, health.
Oh, yes.
I think that's what she means. It's like one of the icons when you open the student's profile in IEP.
So when you open a student's profile, you may see that there is an icon that says that they have a health plan, or they have allergies, or they have some health need that gets reflected. That's going to show on the page when you open the student's IEP. It will also show if they have somebody other than their parent as the person who has the ed rights. It's going to show that as well. It's also going to show if there are any restrictions on parent contact. So yes, that shows on there, and that's done through the CalPADS notes and attachments page. and they have to, the case manager is the person who highlights that and triggers that by creating that icon from the notes and attachments page. And then they have to actually add the court order that that says that the parent doesn't have rights and names who does. They have to add the court order that restricts parent contact. The nurse would be adding the any health plans or any health conditions, and they would be doing that on that notes and attachments page that's part of the SEIS document and not directly into the IEP document, but it's part of the plan, and they should know how to do that. Let me just say this too regarding nursing, because they are definitely assigned to schools. They are active with their students, and they have the responsibility of anything to do with medications, with any services that they might be providing, any treatments. And if they are providing services, if the student has health needs, that icon should be there. That's imperative. And they would be the person who would add that. So including nurses in IEPs is very important. And it's important for any student that has any health need, and the nurse can differentiate that. Are there any other questions?
I think that's it for now.
Questions? Okay. Well, thank you for being here. If you have questions, definitely, let me go back here quickly. Or if you have specific needs, definitely feel free to contact us. Either me directly at my email or through SEIS Help. We definitely will respond. Like I said, it may take a little time, but we will respond. No questions? All right, I'm going to stay here until for these next 2 minutes. If anyone has questions, feel free to ask them. If there's something you need or want to ask, if you need an account, let us know and we will create it for you. We just need to know your name and the school that you're at. So thanks for being here. Thanks for the questions that we did have. And I hope this was helpful to everyone. And here's the feedback. Please feel free, please provide feedback so that we can do better the next time. Thank you all.